Welcome to the 11th episode of Oblivion Cut Content. Today we'll be talking about politics. But not just any politics, interesting fictional politics. Of course, politics have always been a staple of the Elder Scrolls games, but not every game focused on them as much. Case in point, Oblivion. For the fourth Elder Scrolls game, Oblivion, Bethesda decided to tone down their focus on politics after the heavy focus on politics in Morrowind. While I understand this decision completely, it is kinda weird looking back, since this is the game where Uriel Septim dies, one of the most important political players in the series, and one of the only characters to be mentioned in all 4 games at that point. Now, before we can talk about what changed in Oblivion, we'll need to have a proper setup for this content, and for that we'll need to go back to Morrowind. I think this is the first time that I've had to cross-reference these games in one of these episodes, so that's nice. All that aside, during your adventures in Vardenfell, you may hear people talking about unrest in Cyrodiil City. People in Ebonheart will tell you, Uriel Septim is sick, and wizards say his heir, Geldel Septim, and the younger Septims, Emin and Ebel, are just doppelgangers placed in the household during Yagartarn's tenuous Imperial Battle Mage. They say the guard charged the mob demanding destruction of the false heirs. Lots of folks were killed. And the leader of the Fighters Guild, Shoring Hardheart, will also say, Uriel Septim was never a strong emperor, and now he's finally dying of age and illness. A coward's death. They say Okato makes the real decisions. They say Uriel's heirs are really Daedra or shapeshifters planted by Yagartarn. They say the emperor might pull back the legions to try and protect himself. Some of the generals in the legions have one eye on Uriel Septim and one eye on the throne. At a time like this, only the imperial guilds with strong allies will survive. Both of these dialogues basically state that the emperor is dying, people are after his throne, and his 3 sons might be shapeshifters with their own agenda. This is quite an interesting setup, but if you've played Oblivion, you know that this never goes anywhere. The emperor sadly dies before the game's tutorial is over, and all 3 of his sons die off screen. At least he mentions their existence, I suppose.
My sons, they're dead, aren't they?
We don't know that, sire. The messenger only said they were attacked.
No, they're dead. I know it. Assassins attacked my sons, and I am next.
I suppose the last time they are mentioned in Oblivion is in the Black Horse Courier Assassination Edition, mentioning their deaths. That was a very lame conclusion to an interesting build-up. But how did it get like this? Well, we're in luck, as Todd Howard himself basically answered this question. In an interview on the Bethesda website, Todd stated the following about this change. In regards to the politics comment, that's a valid statement. In that Daggerfall and Morrowind both have main stories dealing with a lot of politics. And that wasn't the story we wanted to do this time. There was a time that the Oblivion main quest featured a ton of that, dealing with the Elder Council, but we did end up cutting it while it was still on paper. In all our story reads, it really defocused the main quest from dealing with the Daedra, which we wanted the focus to be. Anyway, I think the lack of actually seeing and dealing with the Elder Council is certainly one of my I wish I had this things, as we wrote some great stuff for it that just didn't make it in. It was the Nobility faction line where you made your way up and became the Duke of Colovia and sat on the Elder Council. The only remnant of that questline is the dead Duke in Castle Kvatch, which was the beginning of that line. Well, there are a couple of things to take away from this comment. The first one being a Bethesda employee actually stating their opinion on something they cut, which is rare. But more importantly, he mentions a so-called Nobility faction line, which is something I'll be taking a look at in a minute. The most interesting part here is that Todd refers to Count Ormelius Goldwine as the dead Duke. Either this was a mistake and he meant to say Count, or there was a different Count while he was a Duke originally, or the third possibility, maybe he held both the title of Count Kvatch and Duke of Colovia, which seems the most likely to me. In any regard, the player would seemingly take over his role as Duke of Colovia. This is a bit weird since there is never any other Duke or Duchess mentioned in-game or in the files, but still. What if this content actually remains in the game? Well, Todd wasn't joking when he said it got removed quite early, although there are definitely some signs that it wasn't removed quite as early as he says. For example, he mentions the Nobility faction line. Well, the Nobility faction actually does still exist. It even has some special uses in the final game. Of course, we have the standard relationship boosts, but members of this faction actually use exclusive random dialogue in the final game, which is a weird but cool detail. The faction even has a lot of members left over, although they're once again a pretty weird collection of people. Of course, we have every ruling count or countess, with the exception of Regulus Terentius, Count Breville. You might say that's because he's such scum. Well, okay, but his son is in the faction. Maybe accidentally in his place? Count Ormelius Goldwine is also not present in the faction, and neither are Rona Hasseldor or Corvus Umbranox, although I can understand those first two being absent. And then we have a lot of important members of the Arcane University: Archmage Hannibal Traven, Earl of Gerol, Corania, and Remanus Polus, and the affiliated Elder Council member High Chancellor Okato as well. And last up we have some random people such as Umbacano from the Imperial City, Skingred Guard Captain Dion, and the noble Sir Lazar Milvan. Again, we have some odd exclusions here as there's no nobles from cities such as Leowyn or Chedenhall. Lady and Lord Drat and Shurgek are also not represented, but I guess that's to be expected from a faction that's barely used for anything. Speaking of barely used, this faction actually has some different rank setup for all of its members, although most go unused as well. Most counts aren't marked as such. Only Janice Hasseldor and Melona Umbranox have this distinction. Every other person in the faction has the lowly rank of Knight. There are no characters marked as Lord or Lady, Baron or Baroness, or Duke or Duchess. Well, if what Todd said is true, then Ormelius Goldwine would have been a Duke, but this faction doesn't represent that either way. Something that's also not represented are the icons for the faction. They all point to the same invalid pet in the creation kit. This icon remains as a leftover, but the faction was probably meant to have unique icons for each rank, although I can't really confirm that. The last leftover of this content remaining in the game is actually something that goes completely unnoticed when playing. During the Battle for Castle Kvatch quest, you can report to Savly and Matches that you found the Count dead. There are two options to tell him this, and they're internally known as MS-49 Duke Dead Nice and MS-49 Duke Dead Mean. At the very least, we can finally confirm that at least some part of the game refers to Count Goldwine as a Duke. Also, something of note is that the ring you're supposed to retrieve during the quest is called Colovian Signet Ring, rather than just Count's Ring or something like that. No one ever mentions the importance of this ring, not even the official game guide. But seeing as it belonged to the supposed Duke of Colovia, it's very possible that the player was meant to receive it as well. Under normal circumstances, this would be the end of this video, but we've recently gotten some new information on the subject, from none other than Michael Kirkbride himself. Kirkbride, for those that don't know, is an important writer for the Elder Scrolls series in general. In July of 2021, Michael Kirkbride responded this to a person talking about the whole Kvatch ordeal. In my romantic notion of how things might have been, I really think Oblivion was poorer for not including the Elder Council stuff, the really elaborate kingmaker role the player would have taken on, and the horror vibe to what happened to Septim's heirs, which we had set up way back in Morrowind. I understand why some weren't fans of all that, but those story threads made the crisis better to me. It was all this one huge epic tapestry of story genres. But hey, games are hard and people need to sleep. Michael was then asked if the questline was connected to the earlier Morrowind quotes I mentioned, to which he responded by saying, "Yep, all that stuff. There was talk of holding a torch near important members of the court to see if they cast a human shadow and not some horrible hunched over claw thing. There was an invasion from another faction from within. And that's actually all we know. At the moment at least. There might be more info in the future, but it's already interesting nonetheless. Who do you think was in the right here? Todd, who wanted to focus on something less politics oriented? Or Kirkbride with a more twisty story following up on Morrowind? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the future.